these sessions are recorded, so if you find them useful, you can go back and study them. What I'm going to try to do is not spend 50 minutes each class, but try to focus on the essential stuff. That may be hard for me, but we'll see what I can do. Okay, first thing I wanted to do is show you what we're going to be working on here. So let me share my screen, share this screen. Can you see the ISLM model near-term goals? Yes, good. Okay, so I'm going to review deriving the ISLM or the IS curve today, which is what we did last class. And we're going to talk about what determines the position of the IS curve, what causes it to shift, those are the same thing. What determines the slope of the IS curve, and then I have an assignment for you. All right, before we jump into that, that's all on the recording. Do you each have, excuse me, do you each have somebody to work with on the assignments? Okay, so I'm guessing that you two are going to be working together since you speak the same language, more or less. Not the same as us, of course. All right, let me write you down. Okay. Anybody else have a partner or two? Mar, do you know who you're working with? Rob?
I think I'm working with Greg.
Okay, does Greg know that?
You must just know about it.
Okay.
Yes.
Good.
Work with Jess.
Hold on. Rob and Greg. Mar, was that you speaking? Or was that?
Charlotte.
Oh, Charlotte. Charlotte, have you consulted with those guys?
No, but I can text her.
No, I mean, just confirm that they're okay having you is all.
Jess was working with me and Bo.
All right, say that again.
Jess, Bo, and I were gonna work together.
Okay, well, you can, the four of you can work if that's okay with you.
Okay.
Hi, Hannah, welcome to the party. So you and Lillian are a team?
Yeah.
Good to hear that. All right. Okay. All right. So let's dive into this. Is there anybody who does not have a partner lined up?
I don't have a partner lined up, but I'll take anyone.
I also don't have a partner.
Okay, you guys want to work together?
Okay.
Sure, that sounds good.
Excitement. Yeah, all right. So that would be Mar plus Quinn. All right, good. All right, you guys are going to want to trade contact information if you haven't already done that. So what's the hoodie you're wearing there, Mar? Oh, Gap. Okay. I have actually heard of that. Thank you. All right. So let's do it. Let me pull up the first slide. 1, 2. Okay. All right. If you remember, we know that the income expenditure model tells us the equilibrium level of GDP, where that is defined as the level of GDP where Y equals EP. That's old news. All right, for example, let me share this with you. This is figure 1. Over here in the northeast quadrant is the income expenditure model. So that's something that you should be very familiar with at this point. Okay, the IS curve that we're going to derive in these graphs makes interest rates and endogenous to the model. Okay, so the first thing that we do, excuse me, is the southwest quadrant here is our autonomous expenditure line. It includes autonomous consumption, that's little a, investment, government spending, exports, and autonomous imports, all the autonomous things. And what we know is that autonomous expenditure is a downward sloping function of the interest rate because the interest rate is the price of borrowed money. What did the Fed do yesterday, by the way? Anybody paying attention to the real news?
They slashed interest rates to 0.
Yeah, they cut interest rates to 0. And why do you imagine they're doing that?
They're trying to slow down the recession, right?
Well, yeah, they're trying to stimulate autonomous expenditure. And we'll talk more about that later. What they're really trying to do is, as businesses see decreases in sales, and we're already seeing that, businesses are going to start to have bills that they can't pay. And so the Fed wants to make sure that there is liquidity in the system, meaning that banks will have plenty of money that they can lend out to businesses to keep them in business. So that's kind of the plan right now. All right. So the northwest quadrant is the 45-degree line. The northeast quadrant is the income expenditure model. And the southeast quadrant is going to be the IS curve. So the way this works is we start with an interest rate, I0. Given the interest rate, the AE curve here tells us how much autonomous expenditure is going to be. Once we have autonomous expenditure, that allows us to anchor our income expenditure line, which then allows us to find the equilibrium level of GDP, which is Y0. So we started with I0 and we ended up with Y0. What this means, again, simply is if the interest rate is I0, the level of GDP that will put the macroeconomy in equilibrium is Y0. That tells us this little red dot is 1 point on our IS curve. Okay. Feel free to ask questions as they come up in case I forget to ask if you have any. But does anybody have questions right now? All right, good. All right, the next step is to do the same thing, but with another interest rate. And so I'm going to do that. Let me see if I can make this work with a minimum of effort. Let's see. Is there an easy way? I don't know if there's an easy way. Let me try this. Nope, that didn't do it. Nope, that didn't do it. How about this? This. Oh, there we go. Stop sharing, just so I can pull up a different picture. All right, moving to figure 2. Figure 2 looks a lot like figure 1. Give me a second here. Okay. Then we share the screen. And there's figure 2. All right, figure 2. Okay, figure 2 is the same as figure 1, except we now choose another interest rate. We choose I1, and where did my cursor go? It has vanished. Okay, anyway, hopefully you can see where I1 is in the southeast quadrant. And then we go over, don't know why that, oh, I know why. Okay, let's try this. Oh, it changed. Okay, it's a little plus sign anyway. Okay, so we have this new interest rate. We go over to the AE curve. What we see is that at a higher interest rate, the amount of autonomous expenditure does what?
Decreases.
Decreases, yes. So what that does in the northeast quadrant is it shifts the AE line down to this point here. And that gives us a new equilibrium level of GDP, which you'll see is significantly below the original equilibrium level of GDP. So we have an I1 and a Y1. That gives us another point on our IS curve. Okay, now what we can do is we can simply connect the dots, and that will give us figure 3, which is, okay, sorry, apologies. Zoom is making nasty notes to me. So let's see. Figure 3. All right. There's figure 3. Okay, figure 3 is just kind of a close-up of the southeast quadrant there with our 2 points and our IS curve drawn through there. So what we have demonstrated is A, how you derive an IS curve, and B, that IS curves are downward sloping. So a higher interest rate corresponds to a lower equilibrium level of GDP. All right. Hopefully, you don't have any questions about that. And I believe that's about where we ended last class. As I recall, the next step was to look at points that weren't right on the curve. So let's try that now. Yeah, I know. I keep trying to do something that it doesn't want me to do. That's fine. All right. All right. Going to figure 4. Hopefully you're not just totally wowed by my fantastic graphics here. Back. There we go. That's better. A little crazy. Here's figure 4. Okay, so what we know is that at any point on the IS curve, y equals EP, which means at any point not on the IS curve, y doesn't equal EP. Okay, so I picked a random point below the IS curve. We're going to do one above also. And so my question for you is, if you're at a point like A, below the IS curve, is EP greater than Y or is EP less than Y? And more importantly, how do you figure that out?
Would it just stay the same?
You mean it's equal to Y?
I don't know.
That can't be right because the interest rate at A is lower than the interest rate at B.
Oh.
If the interest rate is lower, what does that say about EP at point A compared to at point B?
That EP is above Y.
Yeah, at a lower interest rate, EP grows, right? Because of autonomous expenditure. So it must be the case that at point A, Y is less than EP. EP is greater than Y. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, similarly, if we picked a point C, like up here somewhere, if we choose the same level of GDP, and that's the easiest way to do it, as at point B, we know the interest rate is higher, so EP has got to be lower than Y. So above the curve, EP is less than Y. Below the curve, EP is greater than Y. You could memorize this, I suppose, but it's much easier for me to simply work through it each time because it's pretty straightforward. Now, knowing the relationship between EP and Y is going to be important, if not Wednesday, then it'll certainly be important on Friday because, well, you'll see. Mar is really excited, I can tell. All right. Now, okay. All right, let's move to the next item. The next item is what determines the position of the IS curve? In other words, why is it closer to the origin or further away from the origin? The same question is what would cause a shift in the IS curve, okay? What would you say to that? What determines the position of the IS curve? Or what would cause it to shift?
The income expenditure model or EP?
Tell me more.
So if the slope of EP changed, then that would cause, I think, a shift.
Actually, no, it's not the slope of EP.
It's just the height of the EP because autonomous expenditure affects how far out it is.
Yeah, okay, let me show you figure 5. All right, he says with more confidence than he feels. There we go. Figure 5. All right. Let's go over here to the southwest quadrant. Okay, it turns out that the position, the position of the IS curve depends, of course, on the position of the EP line, which depends on the position of the AE line. So it all comes back to autonomous expenditure. Okay, if anything increases autonomous expenditure other than income, well, other than the interest rate, okay, so if there's an increase, say, in government spending or an increase in autonomous consumer spending that is not determined by either income or the interest rate, right, then we know that the same interest rate with more autonomous spending, like government spending, is going to shift the curve out. And because it shifts this curve out, it's going to shift this curve up, and it's going to shift this curve out. So the answer to the question, what determines, what determines the position of the IS curve is its autonomous expenditure, right? So an increase in government spending, say an expansionary fiscal policy is going to show up as a rightward shift in the IS curve. A decrease in export expenditures would be a leftward shift in the IS curve. Make sense? Anybody have questions about that? All right. Hearing none, let's move on. Okay. Now we're going to get to the interesting part. The question is, what determines the slope of the IS curve? That is, let's see. Let's try figure 6. Okay, figure 6. Let's blow it up so that you guys can see it a little better, hopefully. 1, 2. That looks pretty good to me. Okay. Okay, so just think about the slope from a mathematical perspective, right? We're going from, say, point B to point C, right? We're just moving along the IS curve. How do we do that? Well, the interest rate falls, and then the level of GDP rises, right? So there's two steps in the process here, if you think about it. Okay, how do we get from a lower GDP to a higher GDP? What's going on here as we go from B to C?
Increase in GDP.
Interest rate falls,
Interest rate falls, and then what?
and then GDP rises.
But before
more
that,
expenditure like businesses and that.
yes.
People have less incentive to save.
Yeah. So, well, that's not actually true in this model, because saving doesn't depend on the interest rate, except indirectly. But what happens is, first, the interest rate falls. Second, there's an increase in autonomous expenditure, right? Then, because autonomous expenditure increases, GDP goes up. Okay? So there's two real steps there. There's lower interest rates stimulates autonomous expenditure, and there's increased autonomous expenditure causes increased GDP. Everybody got that? Okay. Those two parts correspond to two parameters in the model. What are the parameters?
Multiplier.
Certainly the second one is the expenditure multiplier, right? An increase in GDP gives you an increase in GDP. So the second parameter is the multiplier. What's the first parameter?
The rate of change of the aggregate expenditure.
Well, yes and no. There's a little more to it than that. What causes aggregate expenditure to increase?
Interest rate.
Interest rate.
Lower interest rates. So we're looking at how much of an increase in autonomous expenditure do we get when the interest rate falls, right? Oh, does that make sense? Okay, interest rate falls, how much of an increase in autonomous expenditure do we get? Well, there's actually a term for that. It is the interest elasticity of autonomous expenditure. It's a mouthful.
Aggregate expenditure.
Interest elasticity of autonomous expenditure, which means how much does expenditure change in response to a change in the interest rate. That, by the way, is related to the slope of the AE curve in the southwest quadrant. All right. Excuse me. Okay, suppose we increase the interest elasticity of autonomous expenditure. Okay. What does that do to the IS curve? That's what we're trying to figure out here. Okay, what we've said is the slope of the IS curve depends on this interest elasticity. So if we increase the interest elasticity, what happens to the slope of the IS curve? Suppose we decrease interest rates by the same amount from B to A, right? So we go from IB to IA. Same decrease in the interest rate, but now there's a greater responsiveness in terms of autonomous expenditure.
It'll get flatter.
Say that again?
It'll get flatter.
So what's going to happen then is the same decrease in the interest rate is going to cause a bigger increase in autonomous expenditure. And because a bigger increase in autonomous expenditure, a bigger increase in GDP. So in other words, we're going to go from B through A, not to C, but all the way to C prime. Same decrease in the interest rate, bigger increase in autonomous expenditure, and bigger increase in GDP. All right, let me see if I can show you something here. Oh, I can't see it much yet, but here it is. Okay, this is the same diagram, but with a little more in it. Okay, so with the lower interest elasticity, the decrease in the interest rate took us to point C. With a greater elasticity, a greater responsiveness, the same decrease in interest rate gives us a bigger increase in autonomous expenditure and a bigger increase in GDP. That takes us to out here to C prime. And what that tells us is the IS curve does in fact flatten out. It rotates around our initial point the way we told the story here.
There you are, good on you. Seconds done.
Any questions about that?
So just to confirm, when interest elasticity of autonomous expenditure goes up, GDP also goes up.
Say that again.
So if interest elasticity of autonomous expenditure increases, that'll
Then
therefore
the same change in interest rate will cause a bigger increase in GDP.
Okay.
Yes.
What changes the elasticity?
Me.
Okay.
It's a parameter. It's a pure parameter in the model. So I would have to say it changes. Go Pirates.
Go Pirates.
These are all good questions. Okay, here's one to work on. Suppose we run it in reverse. If there is a decrease in the interest elasticity, explain what that does to the IS curve. Think through what you would say.
We're saying it'll get steeper.
It will. Hey, Bo, do you want to, can you explain that?
Sure. So it would decrease GDP, correct? So your line would look the opposite. It'd be a steeper line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you look at the graph, suppose you start with the black line. So you're thinking B to C prime, right?
Right.
Now you cut interest rates from B, but because the interest elasticity is lower, what happens to autonomous expenditure? Does it rise more or less?
Less.
Because the interest elasticity is lower, you get less of an increase in autonomous expenditure, okay? So what that means is less of an increase in autonomous expenditure, less of an increase in GDP. So you don't go from A to C prime, you only go from A to C. And that gives us a steeper curve than before. So that's right. Anybody have questions about that?
So GDP is still increasing, just not as much as it would if the
Correct. Yeah, because lower interest rates, higher GDP, right? Same thing. Just the question of how much is not as much because the elasticity is smaller.
So I have a question about that.
Sure.
When your change in interest rate is the same as your rate in GDP, does that mean your interest elasticity is 1?
Yes. Yeah. Well, no. Okay. Let me say it a little bit differently. If the percent change in the interest rate is the same as the percent change in autonomous expenditure, then the elasticity is 1.
Got it. Okay.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that the change in GDP will be the same percentage.
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? Aspen, you getting this?
Yeah, I was gonna ask, is there like a realistic point where the elasticity is so low that you no longer get an increase in GDP?
Can you say that again? I can't quite hear your audio.
Yeah, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Um,
Just call me the Verizon guy.
Realistically, is there a point where the elasticity is so low that there's no longer an increase in GDP?
You mean like where we are today in the world? Theoretically, there is. Practically, this is a great natural experiment that we're going into right now in the world. I guess we'll have to see. It depends on why people borrow money. Rachel, Austin, Chester, when did you guys show up?
An hour ago.
Cool. Rachel, is that really you? It's not. It's a 13-year-old boy from Pakistan masquerading as Rachel. She's not muted. Can you chat or something? Okay, never mind. It's okay.
Apparently, she can't unmute, but she says it's her. She just sent me a text.
Okay, and so actually, Joey, I think you're trustworthy, maybe more than she is, so I will take your word for this.
Yes.
And if that doesn't get her to speak up, I don't know what will. Okay. It's an interesting question, okay? And it speaks to something, it speaks to actually what we're going to talk about next, which is the LM curve, okay? If the IS curve shows product market equilibrium, what does the LM curve show?
Is it labor market equilibrium?
A great answer, but wrong. It's the other one. It's financial markets. It's the money market equilibrium. Okay, so we're going to define the LM curve just the same way that we define the IS curve, as all the combinations of interest rate and GDP where money supply equals money demand. Okay. Now, let's think about money demand. Economists have maybe a different idea of what money demand is than ordinary people do. What they mean specifically by money demand is how much money do you want to hold on to? Okay, if you remember from principles, it depends on how we define money. Money could be M1, it could be M2. Let's just go with M1 for now. Does anybody remember what M1 includes? Chester, this would be a good chance for you to jump in. M1? Anybody?
Money in the hands of the public.
That is true, but how do we, what does that include?
Cash money.
It includes currency, but also demand deposits, checking account balances. Okay, so M1 is currency plus checking account balances. Now, in the world in which you guys have grown up, the definition of M1 has gotten a little fuzzy because many of you probably don't even, either you don't have a checking account or you don't use checks. You use a debit card for your transactions. Does that ring a bell? Okay. So if you use a debit card, which is tied to a savings account, that money is every bit as liquid as a debit card tied to a checking account, right? So to put it a little bit differently, M1 today is different, measured differently than it was 20 years ago. But we're just going to kind of gloss over that point for now. What we're talking about is money that you're holding on to in an easily spendable form. Right. So why do people hold on to money? There are two main reasons. This is not rocket science.
Expected future prices.
Tell me more about that.
Just expectations in the future.
Okay. So what do you expect prices to be next year?
Prices of what, though?
Everything. My guess is that in general, the average price of things is probably going to be about the same next year as it was this year, just because we're in a very stable price time period. And so I guess what I'm saying, Charlotte, is your answer makes sense in a world characterized by inflation, but it maybe isn't as important in a world where prices tend to be pretty stable. Okay. What's the number one reason why we hold money? Hannah, what do you think?
I was thinking like future like goals, financial goals.
Okay. You guys are trying too hard. Think like ordinary people. That is reason number two.
Okay.
We hold money as a form of savings, right? For the future. What's number one?
Money is highly liquid.
Is it for spending?
It's for spending purposes. Yeah. Right. We use money because it allows us to buy stuff. Okay. So money demand for transaction purposes is what we're talking about here. Now, what determines how much money you're going to hold for transaction purposes? The question actually answers itself. What I'm going to argue is the more you spend, the more money you hold for transaction purposes. So then the question becomes, what determines how much you spend? Lillian, what do you think? What determines how much you spend?
Your income?
Yeah, you're not Lillian, but yes, absolutely, right? So what we're going to argue is that money demand depends on people's income. Okay, and in the aggregate, the total money demand in the economy depends on the level of national income or GDP. More money demand, more spending more is caused by more income, right? So it goes income, spending, money demand. Somebody just texted me. Who is that? Okay. Got it. Everybody is in. Okay. Now, for saving purposes, and this gets back to the question before, okay, what are the pros and cons of cash as a means of saving? What's good about it? I think
it's very liquid.
Yeah, it's super liquid, right? So if you're traveling and you get a flat tire in a strange town and you have cash, you can pay for the tire repair, right? If it's me, I'm in trouble because I don't generally carry much cash. And so I would have to say something like, you'll have to trust me. I have money in the bank. Look at this face. Don't you trust me? You know, that can be a problem sometimes, right? Okay, so the benefit of money is its liquidity, okay? Liquidity is useful if we need to do some emergency spending. It's also useful if we come across some great investment opportunity, okay? There are some great investment opportunities in the stock market today, okay? And I'm absolutely telling the truth, okay? In 10 years, the market is going to be back up higher than it was before this, this downturn happened, okay? But it's the getting there that is the hard part, right? That's where the risk comes in. Okay, so the other advantage of cash is that it is risk-free, at least in nominal terms. If you put money in the stock market today, it's quite likely that by tomorrow it will be worth less. If you put money in your pocket today, it will be worth the same thing tomorrow. Okay, and that's important. You know, when you don't trust financial markets and financial institutions, you tend to hold on to cash. Okay? Okay, what's the negative of cash as an investment, as a saving option?
You can't earn interest on.
Yeah, you're not earning any income. Okay, that is the big negative. So we can think of a money demand curve like every other demand curve as downward sloping from left to right in terms of the interest rate, because the interest rate is essentially the price of borrowed money. Okay, so at higher interest rates, people economize on holding money because they're giving up interest or some other form of income. But when interest rates are really low or zero, the opportunity cost of holding cash is really low. What happens to money demand in these situations?
Wouldn't money demand increase?
It not only would it increase, but it can be very, very, very high. Okay, Keynes argued for the theoretical possibility of something he called the liquidity trap, where interest rates are so low that no matter how much money the Fed pumps into the financial system, people just hold on to it because there's no opportunity cost. They don't spend it, okay? And that's a bad situation because it means that monetary policy simply can't work there. So who knows? We could be in that situation right now. And I believe our 50 minutes is now up. We made it. Not as bad as a root canal from my perspective. Okay, now the assignment. here's the assignment for your groups. Hey, Chester, do you have somebody to work with? Chester, you need to find somebody to work with on this assignment. Maybe you and Matthew could work together, since I don't think Matthew has a partner. Is that good? Is that okay with you, Chester?
That works.
Okay, good. Let me first write this down. Matthew plus Chester. Cool. Okay. So here's the question. I will post this on our course website in a minute. The question is, going back to the slope of the IS curve, if the expenditure multiplier increases, what happens to the slope of the IS curve? Okay, you want to be able to show this graphically and explain what's going on. Okay. Does everybody understand?
When will this be due?
It's not hard. I'd like to have it due by Friday if you think that's doable. Monday if it's not doable. What do you think? Let's say Monday, because
is that submitted on Canvas?
What's that?
Is that submitted on Canvas with like an assignment?
No, just send me an email.
Email, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's say Monday, because this is the first one and it may take you time to get together and that sort of thing. Not counting you two. I assume that you guys can communicate pretty quickly together. With or without your hat on. All right.
I just have one question, Professor.
Sure.
I'm assuming you want one email for the group, right?
Correct, with two names.
Or
Please put
yeah.
both names on it.
Okay.
And I just have to say that this is the quietest I think Rachel has ever been in one of our classes. So it's a change, not a change for the better, but oh well. All right, I will see you guys again on Wednesday. Talk to you soon. And I will put the video up for anybody who wants to review it or whoever wasn't able to come.
Thank you.
God save the Queen.
Will it be on Canvas or on the website blog?
It will be. It will be on YouTube. Is the short answer.
How do we exit?
But I'll send out the announcement. Okay. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. Good. All right. Talk to you guys on Wednesday. Bye now.
Thank you, Dr. Greenlaw.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.